Hi, in this video I'd like to talk to you about the one software project that you should build that can guarantee you to get a job as a software developer. Hi, my name is Shad Sluter and I'm a professor of computer science and software development at Grand Canyon University. So I talk to my students almost daily about getting their job and about what kind of things that they can do to prepare for that. So a big part of the experience of students at GCU is their capstone project. It is supposed to be done in their final year of school, and its job is to demonstrate all of the technologies and in a very short time show the skills of a student. And so you can see here a presentation from Carter, one of my former students, who is showing a project to an audience about his project that he worked on for a nonprofit organization. As you can see, that his project involved a lot of different technologies that he accumulated over the 4 years that he was in the classroom with me and with other professors. So just like a picture is worth 1,000 words or even more, a project is going to be the most effective thing that you can carry into an interview. And so what I'd like to do in this video is to tell you what kind of project you should build, and then how you should build it, and then talk about making it work as you would present it to a potential employer. So if you follow this recipe, you will be like many of the former students that I have now who are actually making more money than I am and are doing awesome work as software architects in the places that they've actually chosen to place their job. So what I'd like to do first is dispel a few ideas that might be errors actually in what won't work. So some of my students are really smart, but they still fail to get jobs. They have great grades. So in the United States, we go on the GPA system where a 4.0 is the highest marks that you can possibly get. And so I have seen students that are smarter than I am, they can get straight A's, and yet for some reason they fail at the end. They have a nice resume, perhaps. They even are able to put all of the special keywords on there. So if I get a resume and previous jobs where I would actually sort through these to find out who I should hire, I really can't tell from the skills section that if you have more than just hello world on some of those. So when it says you're a Java or a C# developer, what does that mean? A project will answer that question. So your resume might have a great GPA, it might have a list of key terms, and that will get you the interview, but it might not get you the job. Also, think of the projects that you create along the way, whether it was your high school passion or it was something that was done as an introduction to the class. Are projects like Dice Roller going to be good enough to get you an actual job? And it might demonstrate that you have slightly more than Hello World as your experience, but really it's not strong enough. What you need to do then is to demonstrate that your project can solve a problem. Now, what I mean by a problem is a business problem. So put yourself in the shoes of who you are applying to. You want to make their business or their life better. So compare these two solutions. So if Dice Roller is the best I can come up with, then I might not even have a chance when I have another interviewee that has a product that is able to do something that is similar to the business. So it looks to me like this app is used for scanning items and then able to do a web search to find out if you can buy them. So this would demonstrate a whole lot of things that are probably going to occur if I'm going to be building applications or websites for your company. So here's the best advice for picking a project that will get you a job. Try to clone something that already exists and then maybe add a twist to it. So the reason why I say clone something is because you want to be as similar to the work that is already being done at the company that you can show relevant skills in creating. So for example, one of the projects that I've taught in my programming classes is something as simple as a blogging application. So this was a collection of recipes where you can search for a recipe and add a comment and then have an administration screen where you can edit or delete those comments or search for comments. Also, you might want to think about cloning something like Instagram. Look at the task list for all of the features that you would have to build if you were going to create an Instagram clone. If you could demonstrate that you know how to do these, more than likely you've already demonstrated that you can work on a team at whatever company X is doing, because these might not be necessarily social media apps that you're going to be working on at the bank or the insurance company you're applying to, but all of the same kind of technology challenges are there. So let's go back to Carter's project for a minute. So his project and his teammates was to create an event scheduler for a nonprofit organization, and they wanted to notify everybody that was in the meeting with a text. So not something that's like a brand new invention. You don't have to create something totally unique. As a matter of fact, you probably don't want to create something totally unique. You want to be as relevant to the business as possible. So rather than inventing some new concept, they showed that they can make the existing business work more sufficient. Now, serving a customer is a great way to actually understand if you're solving a business problem or not. So you might solve your own passion or your own little toy, but if that's not really what the business is wanting, then you're out of luck. Now, here's an example of where you could get a customer. So Volunteer Match is a website where you can sign up to help businesses. And you'll actually find things like this one that I picked out today was this nonprofit is looking for an application or a web developer. And so they're doing standard things. They probably have login screens. They probably have reports. They probably have tracking of events. And so if you can get a real customer, then you know that you've got something that's actually practical. Now, what features must you include if you want to have your project actually effective in getting the job? Let's start with a popular framework. So when I say a popular framework, I'm saying that you don't invent your own application stack. You want to go full stack with things that already exist. So look at these names on the screen and pick the ones that maybe are most relevant to the job postings that you're looking at. So I'll pick a few of these that you should probably focus in on and then go branch out after those are already mastered. So on the top left here, we see C# and Java using ASP.NET and Spring Boot. Now, if all of you get in your experience is one of those two, that's probably enough. You don't have to be a master of all of these full stacks to get a job. But you want to pick something that is fairly common. So what this does is it allows the people that look at your code to understand the design almost intuitively. They follow standard practices, avoid security issues, and make your code very easily managed by a team. Now, students that graduate with my program at GCU would be able to do the top three. They would be able to build a full stack in any one of those JavaScript, Java, or C# languages. However, one of them is probably enough to demonstrate your project. Also on the front end, pick React, Angular, or Vue, and right now React would be the one that everyone seems to be chasing. And then for a database, you're going to have to pick probably some kind of a MySQL or Postgres or Microsoft SQL as your backend, and then MongoDB is a strong NoSQL language. Also, make sure that when you are designing your application that you're able to separate your concerns. So that way you have a front end and a back end that are distinct, and you have the business layers in between. So part of the design process is the most important is that you understand how your architecture is working. So that may be the difference between somebody that has a formal education in software development than somebody who just kind of picks up and starts coding without a plan. And so the ability to have a business layer and a data access layer and a distinct front end, you may be using a REST API to separate the two, those really separate a coder that is just kind of figuring things out on his own than somebody who is more formally trained. Make sure that your application that you choose for your project has a database. And it must include all of the CRUD operations. So that stands for create, read, update, and delete. So there should be data forms that say add a new item, edit an item, delete an item. There must be the ability to search for the items in your inventory. So whether the data in your application has to do with pictures in a social media post, or airplane tickets in a travel agency, or comments on a blog, or products in a store, the CRUD application is pretty much essential to almost all business tools. So make sure that you're able to do CRUD with whatever database that you've selected. If you want to pick one or the other, I would recommend that SQL be your first choice. Mongo might get all of the attention as this great scalable tool, but in the reality, SQL dominates in most application designs, especially in any kind of legacy software. Make sure that somewhere in your project you're able to incorporate a REST API. That means either creating your own service or consuming somebody else's. By the way, I should tell you that all of the technologies and the tutorials are available on my website, where you can learn these things from a beginner's perspective to more of an advanced. So a REST API is something that most application developers are able to handle. And so if you want to get that job, you make sure that you have this. So this here is an example of JSON formatted data. JavaScript Object Notation is the name for JSON. And REST APIs frequently use this as the coding format. So that way you're able to take this list of data and present it with some kind of a front end. And so make sure that you're able to use or create REST APIs. Make sure that the front end that you create is very pleasing to look at. It needs to be clean and responsive. So that means either for small screens like a phone or a large desktop. The front end is the first impression that you give. And of course, the easiest and most popular way to do this is to go to Bootstrap, or as in this case, you can see Bootswatch, which is just a slight variation that might make your application look a little bit more unique without any more effort. So don't try to invent your own CSS, unless, of course, you are only going to apply for a front-end designer, because you're probably going to end up looking like this when you're done. Just pick something that everyone is used to, and don't try to invent something that's already out there if you don't have to. If you want to pick a front end, I've already alluded to the fact that you should pick React. So if you don't have time to learn React, you can probably use the whole stack using C# or Java without learning it, but if you want to, you can put in React as the front end. What that allows you to do is to have a single page application, an SPA. So since this is so common in so many applications that are out there in the business world, it's a very frequent choice that I see my students doing in their senior capstone project, is that they pick up some React or Angular and incorporate it. Now, it doesn't have to be there, but if they've got the time, it's certainly highly recommended. Also, make sure that you're able to handle security in your application. It's a feature, of course, that we all would assume is there. So security can mean something as simple as knowing who is accessing your app. So a successful login requires a controller and the database that is associated with it. However, there are other things that you should be aware of. Security goes far more than just having a login session. It's the ability to protect yourself against common hacking tools. So SQL injection, cross-site scripting, cross-site posting, exception handling, so that way you can not display the entire contents of your structure to an error. Having authorization tokens, using sessions, using zero-auth, using encryption, password hashing, all of those things that are necessary. And of course, at the school that I'm teaching, we provide this as one of the final things that a student does before we send them off into the real world. You don't have to be the cybersecurity expert, but you have to be able to understand that these are important issues. And by the way, if you pick one of those popular frameworks, such as Spring Boot or ASP.NET, all of these issues have been addressed for you, and you're probably going to avoid most of these problems. Make sure that you are able to pick a library, some kind of a dependency that makes your program a little bit more sophisticated. So this is something as simple as maybe picking a graphing library. So don't invent something to handle graphs or image processing or zip files or integration with PDFs or Excel spreadsheets. All of those libraries are out there already, and if you're able to read the documentation, you can incorporate them quite simply. And that will impress your employer to say that you know how to use other people's tools, because you don't have to reinvent things that are already pretty good. And so that if you're able to incorporate a library such as a graph, then your application not only looks great, but you're able to accomplish a lot in a little bit of time. So that's what you should include. Those are some of the things that you should include as features of your application. Now, how do you do it is also going to be just as important. So once you display your project to a potential employer, the conversation is then going to immediately turn to this question. I can guarantee it. How did you do this? And what they mean was not what did you do, but what was the thinking behind it? What was the design and the process of tracking it? So design is going to separate you from a lot of other coders. I've seen students that are really smart but cannot follow kind of other people's patterns. They can't put into paper and pencil what their goals are, and so their code becomes unmanageable. Honestly, I cannot help them sometimes trying to track down what's going wrong because of poor design. So design goes before coding. So let's take a look at a couple of things that you have to include, and this should also go as part of the presentation that you would give to your employer. So first of all, the easiest design is wireframes. So a wireframe is a drawing of what your application looks like. You've thought of all of the screens from login to data entry to reporting to anything that would be shown to the user. So each page of your application is drawn out, and you can see how you can navigate from one page to another. So you have already a good, clear picture of what you're going to build. So in the real world process, you show this to your customer because early on in the process, you want them to have the ability to change their mind and to include exactly what they really expect at the end. So wireframes is a real easy design process. You can do this on any kind of a tool, whether it's a professional drawing tool or just with your napkin in the restaurant. One way or the other, you have to have a picture of where you're going. It's the blueprint. Now, more technically, you should have UML designs. So UMLs are the Universal Modeling Language speak, you would say. So this would talk about the data. And in this case, you can see that we are designing some kind of a scheduler, it looks like. We have a person that can be one of two types, a student or a professor, and we have an address. And you can see that there are properties that are showing inheritance, and this is the whole object-oriented model. So if you are able to design the UML correctly, your application has a far better chance of working like you want at the end. Also, when you take your design, you not only say that I have a blueprint, but I also have a schedule. And so most people are using what we would say is the agile software development method. And you can expect that employers want you to know something about this. And so sprints and milestones are key terms here. So what's a sprint and a milestone? What you do is you create a board of all of the things that your application has to have. So that's considered the backlog. And I'll leave a link in the description below for more in-depth here on describing all these procedures. But anyway, you want to have the features of your application well defined. Then you want to have user stories so that you know who is doing what. You put a task list together of what you do for your own scheduling. And then you track it to say, in 1 week's time, I was able to complete one or two of these features. And then you're never going to finish your app, but you're at least going to have a pretty good idea of how many features you have and how long it would take to implement the ones that are in the backlog. So if you can communicate that you have a schedule and that you've tracked your hours and that you know how long it would take to complete more work on your application, the employer is going to know without a doubt that you're going to work out on their team. And so this will separate you again from somebody that is able to just show code than to somebody who is able to show you how they were able to go through it. Another procedure that you would want to show that you can follow is the ability to handle code repositories or GitHub. And at least one of the feedbacks items that I've gotten from previous students is that we have not done well enough in doing this as our normal process of writing software. So GitHub, of course, is where you would put a repo. So working in GitHub or something similar is going to be a natural process that you do every day as a software developer. And so if you've already followed this in your project on your own, it'll be much easier to blend in with a team once you're employed. Also, make sure that you are able to host to the cloud. So some kind of a website or an application published to the App Store, you want to be able to have things that are live and actually working. So a big part of this is choosing either AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, or as I mentioned, the App Store. You need to have the ability to publish your app. A great way to make sure that you're ready to publish and push online without errors is to use unit testing. So unit testing is the ability to write code that tests other code. For instance, you can say, I'm going to assert that when a function is completed, the answer will come back in the right data format. It will come back in the proper range. It will tell me a lot of things that you would just naturally test as you would go through an application. And so unit testing allows you to test everything in just milliseconds rather than checking boxes and going manually through it. So this goes very closely to hosting. You want to make sure that your application is ready to be pushed onto the customers without any surprises. And so unit testing is something that you want to include as part of your presentation to the employer. All right, so we got all these different features that we want to include. We now have the ability to show that we're organized and we're able to plan our own life. What are you going to do now that you've got the interview? What is the first question that usually comes up when somebody says, "Hi, welcome to Company X"? Now, we're going to tell you a few things about ourselves, but let's start with you. Tell me about yourself. So then as quickly as possible, after you've had a very brief description of who you are and what your experience is, you want to show what you can do. And so bring your laptop or bring at least some color pictures of things that you created and say, I'd like to share with you a project that I built, and I think it will be very instructive of who I am. So remember, the resume that you write is not going to get you the job. The resume will get you the interview. So make sure that your resume is written in a way that has the right keywords, it has the relevant experience, so that way you can get through the filter. But don't expect that they actually read the resume in a way that you have read it. You know every detail of it. They just pretty much know that you have been selected to be screened. But what does get you the job is your project. So as soon as you can get to the project, the better. Well, let's compare. Which one of these is better? Is demonstrating better than describing? Well, of course it is. It's the ability to show what you know and to prove that it works. So another benefit of this project approach is that you get to create the conversation. You might even drive the conversation. So the person interviewing you might have a list of pre-prepared questions, like tell me about a situation, or what would you do if you had a disagreeable boss, or tell me about your customer experience. So what they're looking for are concrete examples of real life where you were able to perform well. And the project, if you're trying to become a software developer, is going to answer all of those questions on the board. And so you get to talk about which project features were most challenging to you, where you learned the most. If you can compare one plugin to another or one language to another, it's going to be able to demonstrate how well versed you are in what you've learned along the way. And so there's no doubt in their mind about what they're going to remember. They're going to see your project and they're going to know that you can build something similar once you get them hired. So just remember that all of these things that I've tried to show to you are already available at studycoding.org, where I have tutorials on how to build full stack apps. how to manage a project using the agile and software development, how to work with security, how to work with databases, how to program the front end, the back end. So all of this here is pretty much all the resources you need. You just need to do it. So where did I hit the right things? Which ones of these worked for you? Which ones of these do you think are maybe not as important? So I guess that's a great place to comment below. So if this is interesting to you and you want to figure out how to get a career in software development, then I invite you to look at my channel and check out some of the other tutorials. Thanks, and I will see you again in class.